You think you're kind. You think you're generous. You think you're just doing the right thing. But deep down, there's a whisper you keep ignoring. A small, tired voice that says, "Why do I always feel empty after helping everyone else?" That voice is your real self. And this is where the story of a people pleaser begins. It doesn't start in adulthood. It starts long before you knew what a boundary was, before you could name your needs, before you even knew that love could be conditional. Maybe you grew up in a house where emotions were dangerous, where being angry, loud, or needy led to punishment or silence. Maybe you saw that the only time people were happy with you was when you were agreeable. So, you adapted. You learned to smile when you were hurting, to stay quiet when you disagreed, to give and give and give until your worth felt tied to what you did for others. You were not born a people pleaser. You were trained to be one. Carl Jung described this process in terms of the persona, the social mask we create to survive and be accepted by others. And for a people pleaser, that mask becomes the only identity they know. It's polished, friendly, helpful, but it's also fake. And wearing it too long comes at a cost. Your soul begins to atrophy under the weight of everyone else's expectations. You say yes when you want to say no. You help people who never show up for you. You apologize even when it's not your fault. You feel guilty when you rest. And worst of all, you lose the ability to know what you actually want. You've spent so long adapting to the needs of others that your own desires feel like a foreign language. And here's the brutal part. You think they love you, but they don't even know you. They know the version of you that bends, that agrees, that shows up no matter what. That's not love. That's comfort. And comfort is not connection. Let's break this down deeper. Psychologically, people-pleasing is not a personality trait. It's a trauma response. It's a learned behavior rooted in fear of rejection, abandonment, and disconnection. It's survival, disguised as kindness. You didn't become a people pleaser because you were too nice. You became one because you learned that being honest, being you, was dangerous. So you created a mask, and that mask became your safety. But here's what Carl Jung warns us about masks. The persona is a system of behavior which is partly dictated by society and partly by the individual's expectations. But it is always a compromise. In other words, your mask helps you function in the world, but it never feeds your soul. It helps you be accepted, but not understood. It lets you survive, but not live. And the longer you wear it, the more disconnected you become from your authentic self. You feel it in the quiet moments, when you're alone and there's nothing left to perform, when you've made everyone else happy, but still feel empty inside. You wonder, why do I feel so unseen? Why does no one ever check on me? Why do I attract people who take, but never give? The answer is painful, but honest. Because you trained them that way. You taught them you didn't have needs. You showed them you'd always be available. You never told them no. So now, when you try to set a boundary, they call you selfish. And that's the trap. The moment you stop pleasing them, they punish you. They withdraw. They call you changed. They make you feel guilty for finally choosing yourself. But that's not proof that you're doing something wrong. That's proof that your love was never unconditional to begin with. Let's go deeper. Most people pleasers aren't aware they're living a lie, because society rewards them. You're the nice one, the go-to person, the helper, the fixer. You get compliments, you get validation, you get approval, but you don't get rest. You don't get intimacy. You don't get reciprocity. And slowly, resentment starts to build. You start feeling angry, but you don't know how to express it. You start feeling tired, but you keep saying yes. You start feeling lost, but pretend everything is fine. You smile, even when your soul is bleeding, because the mask must stay on, even when it's suffocating you. Carl Jung believed that healing begins when we confront the parts of ourselves we've buried. He called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole by integrating our unconscious parts. For the people pleaser, this means meeting the part of you that's angry, that's tired of being walked on, that wants to scream instead of smile. It means unlearning the belief that your value comes from being useful. You are not here to manage other people's emotions. You are not responsible for keeping the peace. You are not a tool for someone else's comfort. You are a person with needs, desires, boundaries, and the right to be loved without performing for it. But that kind of love will never arrive until you take off the mask. And yes, it's terrifying. Because when you finally say no, people will leave. When you start telling the truth, some will get angry. When you choose yourself, you'll lose the ones who only loved the version of you that said yes to everything. But what remains is real. What stays is truth. And that's when healing begins. Because the goal is not to be liked by everyone. The goal is to be seen, fully, honestly, painfully, by someone who doesn't flinch. That someone must be you first. You say yes, every time, even when you're exhausted, even when your stomach knots, even when your heart says, don't. You say yes, because you're afraid of what happens if you say no. That's not kindness. That's fear of rejection, disguised as love. And the scariest part is this. Most of the people you please don't love you. They love what you do for them. They love your flexibility, your patience, your silence. They love that you're predictable, that you're always there, that you make them feel better without asking anything in return. But that's not connection. That's control. Let's talk about relationships. Romantic, platonic, even family connections. People pleasers tend to attract emotional vampires. Narcissists, takers, controllers. Not always intentionally, but energetically, it happens again and again. Why? Because people pleasers don't enforce boundaries. They avoid conflict. They minimize their needs. They become emotionally safe, the kind of person who absorbs pain without releasing it. They don't ask, they adjust. They don't confront, they comply. They don't say, "I'm hurt." They say, "I understand." This makes them perfect hosts for people who feed on emotional power. And here's where Carl Jung's shadow work comes in. Jung believed that when we suppress our true feelings, we don't destroy them, we bury them. And buried emotions don't go away. They form the shadow self, the repressed, denied parts of who we are. For a people pleaser, the shadow is full of rage. Yes, rage. The kind of rage that says, "Why does no one ask how I feel? Why am I the only one trying in this relationship? Why do they love everyone else more than me?" But you don't show that rage. You stuff it down. Because expressing anger feels dangerous. Because if you push back, they might leave. So you pretend you're okay. You forgive too easily. You explain away their bad behavior. And in doing so, you become invisible. Let's go deeper. Carl Jung described the path to wholeness as the integration of opposites. What does that mean for you? It means you must invite the bad parts of yourself to the surface. The part of you that wants to say no. The part of you that feels resentful. The part of you that wants space, silence, respect. Because until those parts are honored, you will keep betraying yourself. You'll stay in relationships where love feels like a debt you're always trying to repay. You'll tolerate jobs where overworking is your only value. You'll bend until your identity snaps. And the people around you won't notice, because you taught them to ignore your needs. And you did it with a smile. Let's be honest. You weren't too nice. You were afraid. Afraid of losing love. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of what would happen if you were no longer the good one. That fear becomes a cage. Even when you're free, you still behave like a prisoner. You ask for permission. You seek approval. You walk on eggshells. And every time you do that, a tiny piece of your authenticity dies. That's why people pleasers feel empty. Not because they're not loved, but because they're not loved as they truly are. Let's talk about how this affects self-image. The people pleaser often appears confident to others, kind, generous, supportive. But inside, they hate themselves, deeply, quietly, constantly, because they know the love they receive isn't real. It's not for who they are. It's for the performance. This creates what Jung would call a split in the psyche, a tension between the persona, the mask, and the self, the truth. The wider that gap becomes, the more fragmented the person feels. You might notice it as constant self-doubt, fear of upsetting anyone, feeling exhausted around people, shame after setting boundaries, chronic anxiety, and people-pleasing spirals. Because the more you lie to yourself about your limits, the more you start to believe you don't have any. And that's dangerous. Here's a harsh truth. Being liked by everyone is not a flex. It's a warning sign. It means you've watered yourself down so much. You've become palatable to even the most talk people. Real self-worth begins when you're okay with not being liked. When you can sit with someone's disappointment. When you can say no and not feel guilty. When you can walk away without justifying it. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And people-pleasing is the fastest way to never find out who that is. Let's go even deeper. When you always say yes, you rob others of the chance to know your limits. You rob yourself of the experience of real, mutual respect. True relationships require conflict, disagreement, boundaries, tension. But people-pleasers avoid all of that. They think peace means the absence of conflict. Wrong. Peace is the presence of honesty, even when it's messy, even when it's uncomfortable. You can't be loved as you are if you never show them who you really are. It's time to face the scariest question. If I stop pleasing everyone, who will still love me? That's not just a question. That's the doorway to your healing. Because the people who remain, they'll love you without conditions, without the performance, without the mask. And for the first time, you'll feel something you've never felt before. Safety. Not because you're useful, but because you're real. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, just silent. A moment when you realize, I've been there for everyone, but no one is there for me. It's not bitterness, it's clarity. A chilling, lonely kind of clarity that cracks open the lies you've been telling yourself. That you're loved, that you're respected, that your kindness means something. You realize the truth. You've been used. And not maliciously, not always with bad intent, but consistently, routinely, because you never asked for more. You trained the world to treat you like you didn't matter. And now you're done. That moment, that quiet internal death, is the breaking point of the people-pleaser. It's terrifying, because for the first time, you feel the weight of your own absence. You look back on every yes you gave out of guilt. Every time you helped someone who never helped you back. Every time you kept your pain to yourself because you didn't want to burden them. And suddenly, you're angry. The rage that Carl Jung described in The Shadow finally bubbles up, not as destruction, but as transformation. Because the truth is, you can't heal what you don't let yourself feel. And you've never let yourself feel the anger, the resentment, the loneliness, because you thought those emotions made you a bad person. They don't. They make you human. Let's talk about the real fear. The thing that's been controlling your entire personality. The fear of saying no. Because when you say no, people might leave. They might call you selfish, cold, difficult, ungrateful. You might lose them. And when you've built your entire identity around being the good one, losing them feels like losing yourself. But here's the paradox. If you're only loved when you're agreeable, you're not loved. You're tolerated. You're convenient. You're replaceable. Real love doesn't demand your silence. Real love doesn't punish your truth. Real love doesn't collapse when you set a boundary. And the moment you stop people-pleasing, you start filtering out everyone who only stayed for the performance. Yes, people will leave, and it will hurt. But what stays will be real. Let's bring Carl Jung back in. Jung's process of individuation, becoming your whole self, requires a confrontation with the unconscious. For the people-pleaser, this means turning inward and meeting the parts of you you've rejected, the part that's tired of being liked, the part that wants space, the part that wants to be chosen without proving your worth. Integration doesn't mean becoming aggressive or cold. It means becoming honest. It means finally telling the truth. I can't do this. I don't want to be around this energy anymore. I matter too. That's not weakness. That's evolution. And it starts with small choices. You begin reclaiming yourself when you pause before saying yes. You say, "Let me get back to you." You let people sit with their disappointment. You stop over-explaining your decisions. You let the silence stay. Instead of filling it with fake comfort, you stop trying to control how others see you. And you focus instead on seeing yourself clearly. And here's the irony. The more honest you become, the more magnetic you become. Because realness is rare. The right people will feel safe around you, not because you say yes to everything, but because they know you mean it when you do. Let's talk about grief. Yes, grief. Because when you stop being a people-pleaser, you don't just gain clarity. You lose people. You lose routines. You lose fake peace. You lose the fantasy that being nice would one day be enough. That if you just tried a little harder, they'd see your worth. You grieve the version of you that tolerated too much. You grieve the childhood that taught you to earn love. You grieve the time you can't get back. And that grief, it's sacred. It means you're waking up. You're no longer begging for crumbs of affection. You're no longer shrinking to be digestible. You're no longer offering your soul in exchange for temporary safety. Carl Jung believed that the journey toward authenticity is painful, but essential. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For the people pleaser, this means embracing the parts of you that were never allowed. Your anger, your needs, your space, your voice, your no. You don't need to become rude. You need to become whole. That means learning to say yes when it feels aligned. Say no without guilt. Set boundaries without explaining. Ask for help without shame. Walk away when you're not respected. It means letting people be disappointed, letting them misunderstand you, letting them leave, because protecting your peace is not betrayal. It's self-respect. So, what now? You rebuild, slowly, quietly, truthfully. You stop chasing validation. You start giving it to yourself. You stop hoping they'll choose you. You start choosing you. You stop fearing loneliness. You realize it's better to be alone than surrounded by people who only love your silence. You don't need to be the nice one anymore. You just need to be you. And if that means fewer friends, so be it. If that means awkward silences, so be it. If that means losing the people who only stayed for your yes, so be it. Because what you gain is peace. And peace is loud, not in volume, but in power. So I'll ask you one question, one that Carl Jung would have demanded you face. If you stop trying to please everyone, who are you? If this video made you uncomfortable, then it's working. If you felt called out, then maybe it's time to stop calling it kindness and start calling it what it is: self-betrayal. But you can change that, starting now. Say no, not to hurt them, but to save yourself. Because the truth is, you were never meant to be nice. You were meant to be real. If this video shook something inside you, if you saw yourself in every word, then don't just scroll away. Comment below and tell me, what's one moment in your life where you said yes, but really wanted to say no? Say it out loud. Reclaim it. And if you're ready to stop betraying yourself to please others, like this video, subscribe to Psychatic, and consider sending a super thanks to support more raw, honest content like this. Because the world doesn't need more nice people. It needs more real ones. And maybe that starts with you.